Hello, Kirsten. My guest today is Kirsten Dawes, who's the planning and production manager at my dream concert hall, the Boulez Saal. Kirsten, welcome. I'm so happy to see you. I can't tell you how happy I am to see you again. Kirsten and I met when a board member, Mamie Angus, and I went to Berlin to a couple of Andras Schiff's concerts in the Boulez Hall, and we thought we died and gone to heaven. And then I had the privilege of spending a little time with Kirsten when she came to Vancouver, because you've got family here, right?
Right. Yeah.
First of all, tell me, what does it mean, head of artistic planning and production?
I think people who work in our world, and particularly planning and production people, we tend to be people who do everything. I have the incredible joy to work with Daniel Barenboim as the president of the organization, and very much still a programming leading figure for all of us in the organization, and he has a strong influence on what we do. We discuss planning with him in great depth, and then also with our director of the hall, Ole Beckhoy, who is an absolute visionary, in my opinion. I think I get to perhaps be a little bit biased, but he really is somebody who is incredibly in touch with the future and with making fantastic, exciting things happen in a future-oriented way, but in a way that is always rooted in artistic quality. So what we do in this group is think about programming, think about what we want to present in the hall. That's the artistic planning part of my job. And then the production part of the job is to actually go out and make that happen. So to engage artists, talk to them about programs, and then with my team, and I have a wonderful team, I could never do it all on my own, to actually get all of the logistics going so that people, have flights and hotels and get to the hall with a contract and all of that.
Maybe those of you who have really good ears can pick up that Kirsten has a very similar accent to mine. And the fact of the matter is that she and I studied music, both of us, at the Cape Town College of Music, which is part of the University of Cape Town, which is just bloody extraordinary. Kirsten, so tell me, how did you land up in the job you have now from being in Cape Town?
It was a fairly long road. I started learning German as a schoolgirl, and I had an absolutely wonderful teacher in 8th grade German, and then changed schools and dropped it, but was sort of fascinated by the country. And when I went back to university, I'm sure you had the same situation. If you study music, or certainly when I studied, if you studied at the University of Cape Town, you had to also do a so-called non-music subject in your first year. I picked German on a whim, basically, and then carried on with it while it was sort of parallel to my music studies, and actually loved my German language and literature studies. And then by chance, I was injured as a student, and playing the clarinet became quite hard. And I took a year off and visited a cousin who lived in Berlin, and fell absolutely head over heels in love with the place, that I'm going back one day. And eventually I did. And in March 2002, I arrived here with a suitcase and sort of the determination to live here for 5 years or forever. The original plan was to get to write a PhD. I was planning to work on musicology and Holocaust. I was interested also sort of with my South African roots on how music is used in oppressive societies. And I had a very clear idea of there was a musicological magazine that I wanted to study and to look at the ways in which that changed with the whole Gleichschaltungs process that happened in Germany from April of 1933 onwards. And I I did that. I mean, I started working on that, and you know, I was babysitting and translating and generally doing what young people in foreign countries do. And somewhere along the line, I realized that I didn't want to write about music. I wanted to work with music and musicians. And then I took a step by a certain amount of serendipity into working on an education project with Catherine Milliken and the Berlin Philharmonic, based on the Brahms Requiem. And was fascinated by working very much in a dramaturgical field, looking at contents, looking at interesting ways of presenting musical ideas, and could very happily have stayed in that sort of more educational field. But as life is, I was offered a job in orchestral management with a student orchestra called the Junge Deutsche Philharmonie, and that was a couple of years of tour management, but also getting my feet wet with programming. I worked in the programming committee, and with a bunch of young people, not much younger than myself, just sort of thinking up exciting things. And from there, I went to another rather wonderful orchestra called the Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie Bremen, which is one of the best known chamber orchestras in the world, and they've become particularly well known for their Beethoven cycle. And I worked there very closely with the orchestra and their management, and with the conductor Pavel Järvi, who is their chief conductor. And had an awful lot of fun traveling the world, but began to feel more and more that I wanted to create more of my own programming profile. I didn't want to just be responsible for the nuts and bolts. I wanted to think about what we were putting on stages and why. And then I was talking to our mutual friend Bettina Meno one day.
Yes.
By the way, there's this new hall opening in Berlin. And I thought, oh, that sounds like me. And never quite believed that I'd be the one, but here I sit.
And how long ago was that?
So the conversation with Bettina was in April 2016, and I started working for the organization in August of 2016, and we opened the hall in March of 2017.
Those people who are sort of pay any attention to me from time to time, and who've maybe kind of entered my orbit in the last 2.5 years, will know that I'm obsessed with the Boulez Hall, and particularly apart from the fact that it's beautiful, acoustically superb, there's not a bad seat in the house, and all that, it's tucked into an already existing building. And given the situation with land in Vancouver, I think that the greatest challenge, and we certainly need a hall here, another chamber music size hall, given the situation with the cost of land and so on. I walk around Vancouver looking at buildings. So if anybody who happens to watch this knows of a building, and there are wonderful buildings in Vancouver, that needs to get a new inside, please let me know.
I think the thing to think about when you're thinking about that too is it doesn't have to feel like an obvious place to put a concert hall. You know, the building that we're in used to be the set store of the Staatsoper Berlin. It didn't come with its perfect acoustic. You can make all of that later.
One thing you said to me when I met you in Berlin, absolutely, and it's typical of my head, of all the things we talked about and of all the things we saw and heard, your one statement about the seats in the hall stuck with me, because the hall is elliptical and the chairs go around, right? And so you said in order to fit the chairs in, they had to be an unusual shape, right?
Each chair has its very special place within the hall. To fit them all into the oval, they have to be very slightly different in size. So the chairs arrived in the hall. We have this set up sort of like almost like a sports stadium tribune made out of beautiful cedar wood, but the same sort of setup. And that these tribunes can be rolled back and forth, which is part of the modular aspect of the hall. So that was all in place, and then the chairs arrived, and each of the metal mountings on the tribune were numbered, and then they had to be fitted with the corresponding chair with the corresponding number.
So when you change the hall around, it's actually a piece of the stuff on which the chairs are mounted. So like all the chairs in one row will go together, so you don't have to go back and find out what goes in what again each time.
Yes, it's a more manual process than I initially imagined. When I was interviewing for the job and I was told it's going to be a manual hall, I thought, I mean not a manual hall, a modelable, a movable hall. I thought, you'll push a button and it'll all go, and it's much more work than that. We do need about 2 hours to change the setting. Each chair that we want to push away for a side of the building has to be flipped over manually. And then there's a system of caterpillar treads underneath these tribune setups.
Right.
And they pull back into the wall. And so the chairs are then flat, and that pulls back into the wall. And then you can change the oval into a sort of a Greek amphitheater, or in fact, for Boulez Saal once, we took away almost the entire seating set at ground floor level, had just one row of seating and then this deep oval pool in the middle with steps going down into it. And then we set the ensemble up in there. We've had much more of a chance to try things out now. And it's also interesting to notice how sometimes, even though you know that you could do anything, it's actually good to go back to basics, and that the hall is at its most special when it's in its basic oval setting. That there's something, musicians are not necessarily initially comfortable with that when they walk into the hall for the first time and think, I have to play a piano recital and my audience is sitting behind me. Or even more, a Liederabend.
Yes, tell me about
and
that.
We'll get to them in a sec. But actually, they all then come off the stage and say, gosh, it's like sitting in a big hug.
How wonderful. Oh, what a lovely way of thinking of it.
So there's this very warm feeling of concentration. There's this feeling that everybody's very involved in the performance, and that's special. And I mean, actually, to be truthful about the lead situation, actually, there we do a sort of a frontal situation, because we've realized, again, it's a sort of, we talk a lot about psychoacoustics. I've actually tested it out with, actually when Christian Gerhard was singing at the hall, I walked around the whole hall and I listened to him from behind and I could hear every single word he was singing. But people don't tend to believe that they can hear a singer if they're sitting behind them.
Yes.
So in the end, we decided to make that a slightly more traditional setting, and we leave one block of seats we simply don't sell.
In this part of the world, and I would imagine I'm not alone on this continent. So in that I include the rest of Canada and probably a goodly part of America. It's challenging to sell song recitals.
I don't think that this is purely a transatlantic problem. I think that song recitals are something that people see as quite difficult to reach. People feel that they're elitist, that they're not for everyone. And it's something we've been talking about in the hall a lot recently. We have our Schubert Week once a year, which is curated by Thomas Hampson, and the house is full of young singers in all directions. We've actually just done it. If anybody wants to watch it, it's online until the 25th of February for free. Scads and scads of Schubert, basically. And conversations with young singers and so on. And we've been talking to this group of young singers, among them quite intensively with Emma Nikolovska, about ways to connect to more people with song. And it's an interesting thing that it's seen as being so hard to connect to, because actually the poetry in most of Schubert's songs, not all of them, some of them are utterly banal, but most
Yes.
of the poetry is absolutely timeless.
Yes.
Goethe on love,
Yes.
young love hasn't changed in the last few hundred years. Those feelings remain. We all feel those things. So how do we show people how actually intense and moving a song evening can be? How do we break down those barriers that make people feel uncomfortable? And I don't have any answers to that. So if anybody does, I'm up for suggestions.
If you just try to think of it from a sort of an abstract point of view, why would the notion of a leader recital be any more terrifying, if I can use that word, than the notion of a viola recital or a cello recital? Maybe one of the challenges is the singers today. When you think of singers like Bryn Tervel or Simon Kinleyside or Emma Nikolowska or Cecilia Bartoli, and I'm just talking about recitals, they're so much less stiff than the old notion of what a,
Exactly.
as wonderful as it Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, all those people of the past were, there was that perception that you put it in a picture frame and it belongs to the past.
And I think the thing that we tend to forget, and that we also as presenters need to remember, is that, the original Schubertiaden, the evenings in Schubert's home, they were rip-roaring parties.
Exactly. Yes.
And we need to find that joy again. I mean, we had great fun. We actually did a workshop. We're doing quite a lot of talking about digitality and using digital material to reach people at different levels, but also very much sparked by the pandemic. What do you do when you can't do concerts and so on? And we spent a day talking about specifically Schubert and song, and with our young singers and young pianists and Thomas Hampson. And we did a design thinking workshop around, which is very much based around what does the listener need to understand and to grip into this. And one group had both Emma Nikolowska and the pianist and poet Daniel Gerzenberg in it. I don't know if you know him.
Daniel Gersheimer, did you?
Gerzenberg.
Oh, Gerzenberg. No, I don't know him.
He's a young, grew up in Germany and made a very conscious decision to become elite pianist rather than anything else. And he's also a poet. And the two of them, together with the director of our hall, came up with this idea of an Instagram poetry slam. And they demonstrated it to us by getting the rest of us to each write a 3-line poem. Then they took those poems, picked their favorite, and improvised a song. Boom, right in front of us. And it was not bad,
That's a really neat idea. I love that. The other thing is, I always think of what, I think it was Joyce DiDonato who once said, she said two things that completely resonated with me. One was, she really, when she sings in opera, she much prefers to perform for people who've never been to the opera before, because she said they come fresh. If they're opera aficionados, they will come to the opera with their favorite performance already in their head, and then they judge what she does against what's already in their head. That's so bloody true. The other thing she said was, in song recitals, she's always singing to the top of people's heads because they're following the text. A few years ago, we were to have presented our first ever dual vocal recital with Mia Person and Florian Busch and Malcolm Martineau. And we had just started using surtitles. It's preferable that people are looking up. It's a costly business, you have to find the right person, and so on and so forth. In any case, that joint vocal recital turned out to be wonderful in its own way, but it was a catastrophe because there's light here. Because Florian arrived in Vancouver with no voice.
Oh gosh.
I then went back to the airport to get Malcolm, who'd come on British Airways. And on my way to fetch Malcolm, my cell phone rang in the car. And it was Mia's manager to say, I've got bad news for you. Mia got caught in traffic on the M4 or whatever it is, and she didn't make it onto the plane. But don't worry, she's going to come tomorrow, which was the day before the concert. So I took Malcolm down to the hotel, and Malcolm said to me, it's inimitable, Malcolm. Don't worry, we'll fix it. We'll do something.
That's very nice.
And so I took him to the hotel, and he must have conferred with Florian. And Malcolm phoned me that evening. He said, "Don't worry, Mia and I will work out a program," which they did. Of course, Florian couldn't sing. But the point of it is, Malcolm so charmingly introduced what they were going to be doing, that he set the stage. This group of songs is blah, blah, blah. He does it in such a charming way that you didn't need surtitles and you didn't need know nothing, because there it was, all set up for you. So we've got to change things, and
we do. And I don't think there's one perfect solution. That's the other thing, is I think that one of the things that we as presenters have to be prepared to do is to keep searching and to keep finding the right thing for the right group of performers. Sometimes you have performers who are wonderful performers who absolutely hate speaking in public, and that's okay. That's not their job. And then you need to find another way to do it. And I think that's part of what makes our job fun, actually, is to say, well, okay, so how are we going to do this? What do we want to transport? Why do we want to transport it? And that's also something that I ask myself a lot when I'm programming concerts is, what is the imperative? What are we actually doing here? And why are we doing it? And that's how you make a decision that is likely to make a concert that really transports something, rather than everybody loves the Beethoven piano trios, And everybody does, and they're wonderful. I'm not saying don't program them. It's just, what do we put them with and why, for example?
As a recital presenter on the other end of the planet, when I book musicians, they're on tour, and this is the program they're offering for this tour in the spring of blah, blah, blah. So I have no input whatsoever as to the program, except if 4 people offer the same Beethoven sonata, I will say, sorry, so-and-so got it first. At the festival, I used to be able to program, and it was wonderful, trying to decide what music goes with what music, because some music really doesn't work together. And it's so wonderful to be able to put programs together and to be to experiment with things and step out of the box, as it were.
Yeah, we try to give people, we have a sort of motto at the Pierre Boulez Saal, and that's music for the thinking ear.
Oh, how lovely.
Which I rather like.
Yes.
Yeah. And so what we try to do with each program is to just open the doors and windows, to use Tom Hampson's words, onto something else. So we try to always have one of the big classical or romantic gems, a Mozart or Beethoven trio or a Brahms quartet or whatever. Yeah. And then something that's classically modernist, Second Viennese School, or, French, 20th century, whatever, and then something really, really new, something written in the last 50 years or so. And it's interesting because one might not think that that's much of a sort of a red thread through the program, but it has an incredible way of making you listen to each of the pieces slightly differently to how you would if you listened to a pure Mozart evening, for example.
Absolutely. It's context. You know what? In some ways, I used to think this when I was programming the festival. It's like putting together a meal, because that is an art in itself.
No, absolutely. And I remember actually when I was learning to cook in a rather nice hotel in Knysna in South Africa.
Oh,
And my mother, who managed the hotel, used to look at me and she'd say, okay, now you need to be careful with the plate because you don't want everything on the plate to be brown, for example. Or,
yes, yes.
Or if you look at a meal with various courses, you want to mix your flavors in such a way that the palate is excited.
So when you get to artists like Andras, does he come to you with the program, or do you ask him to?
Well, Andras and Mr. Barenboim are very good friends, so
Yes.
they talk about programs a lot. And until now, what we've done with him has been entirely Bach, actually, and that's been wonderful. He's done this absolutely incredible series of concerts where he talks about the pieces. Started with the Goldberg variations,
yes,
and then we did the partitas, and then we went on to the well-tempered clavier, and he tells the story of the music so well, and he explains the counterpoint so beautifully that you then listen to the music in a completely different context. Somebody like Andras should choose what they get to do, you know.
Yeah.
We'll often talk to people and say, look, we'd like something in this direction, or we absolutely love the way you interpret this composer. Can we start building the composer? Can we start building the program from here? For instance, with Leonidas Kavakos a few years ago, we were talking about doing a recital with him anyway, and at the same time we discovered the Greek composer Nikos Skalkotas, and it was a complete revelation. Very, very, very interesting Greek composer who's almost unknown. He studied in Germany with people like Buthoni and Schoenberg, and then returned to Greece, and really outside of Greece is barely known, but very interesting 12-tone pieces and so on. And so then we sort of said, oh, you know, you're coming to do a recital, and could you please put that particular sonatina in? And he did that and then built the program around it. And that's a lovely way to start, when you have something interesting to drop into the program, and then the musician gets creative around that.
It's interesting that you just said that, because I was actually going to ask you, in your exploration of music which is contemporary, how challenging is it, and what might motivate you? You're looking beyond the boundaries of Europe. I mean, for example, what hope would a Canadian composer have of landing up with a work at Boulez Saal?
An interesting composer always has a hope of landing up at the Boulez Saal. It needs to cross my radar. And there are various ways that happen. You know, I mean, the reason that I was in Canada a couple of years ago was because I was going to the Banff competition, for example, and that opened me up to a world of sound, because there was a composer with a piece in the competition, for example.
Yes.
I mean, how challenging is new music? I think it becomes less challenging the more time you spend with it.
Yeah.
I mean, your listeners and watchers who jumped in onto the New Music Festival that you partnered us on, which was such fun, will have heard Daniel Barenboim asking the question. I think the one question that came up a couple of times actually was, how do I get my father, who only listens to old rockers, to listen to Boulez? And the group in the hall were sort of, well, you know, or does my father need to be educated? And the question is, it comes up again and again, do I need to be educated to listen to new music? And my answer to that is a little bit based on what Alex Ross said in his book The Rest is Noise. Do we feel that we need to be educated to enjoy contemporary art? We tend to go to galleries and just look at the art. The thing about art is we can look away and come back and find our way to it. And with music, we feel like it's more in our space because it's in our heads. But in a way, it's the same sort of thing. I mean, a lot of the very complex Boulez pieces, our Boulez ensemble plays them regularly. And something like Soir and Cease is starting to feel very much like a Mozart quartet to me by now, because I've heard it so often and you become familiar with the rhythms and the shapes. So I would really say the more you engage with complexity, the less difficult it feels. And I would really encourage people to do that.
I think when people come to me and say, even maybe before they've bought a ticket or when they've just bought a ticket, they'll say something like, well, I'm not in a position to judge because I don't know anything. And I say that's nonsense.
Exactly.
Because you don't have to be learned about music in order to appreciate it. For me, even I had some education. I mean, I'm not at the level that you are, but everything I respond to is from my gut. I don't sit and analyze the piece as it's going on. But I do agree with you. The more you hear these kinds of sounds, the more accustomed you can become to them. And maybe it's like learning a language.
Absolutely. I mean, that's actually also something that was talked about a lot in the New Music Festival, was how your spoken language affects your musical language. And the fact that you can, I mean, even, when you go back to Baroque music, French Baroque music is very different from Italian Baroque music, for example.
Yes.
Perhaps even more so than if you go more modern, when the world was becoming more globalized.
Exactly.
But yes, absolutely. I mean, my partner is a computer programmer, and he often has the most profound things to say after concerts of anybody who I talk to. And that has nothing to do with education and everything to do with guts.
One thing I will say is that our audience is hungry for education things, but entertaining education. And you keep saying things that I think, wow, that would be a great topic to discuss. The notion of language and adapting to different kinds of musics, and to have a discussion around that and to talk about all these kinds of issues would be fantastic.
I mean, one could do something a bit like a wine tasting. You could take an English Baroque ensemble, an Italian Baroque ensemble, and a French one, and listen to their recordings, and approach them exactly like you would a wine tasting.
Exactly. Yeah, that could be awesome. Now, do you ever program South African composers?
Well, we have the Signum Quartet coming to our Quartet Week this year. They've got a piece by Priorena on the program. Kathleen Tagg, who is a wonderful South African pianist and composer living in New York, has done, together with her partner David, who's a clarinetist who moves between the worlds of very high-class classical playing and fantastic, amazing klezmer playing. They came and did a project with us called Breath and Hammer, and they're actually supposed to be bringing it back in May if travel from New York to Germany is possible in May. But where they have this incredible mix of piano sounds, some of them composed by Kathy, some of them arranged by Kathy, some of them arranged by David. She plays inside the piano. They have a video element involved. It's a very interactive project, and it's wonderful. I mean, what they did was they are friends with a number of composers, and each of these composers gave them the gift of a tune, a song. And then they arranged them and turned them into their Kathy and David Breath and Hammer thing. so that there are seeds of pieces by the Syrian composer Kinan Asmeh, who also often plays at the hall, and
Yes.
We played a number of his works as well. There's John Zorn in there. There's all sorts of, and then there are one or two pieces by Kathy and David themselves.
How come I've never heard of them?
I mean, it's not, it's not standard classical fare. It's quite different. But it's wonderful, and they're both really fantastic players. I can send you some.
Please, please. I mean, like, we had booked for this season because I do like to step out. So I mean, this is not even in the same league. It's not leagues. It's genre. We're going to present the Ukulele Orchestra of Great Britain.
Oh yes, they're fun.
And I mean, and I brought Silk Road, and I mean, I have done things outside the realm. I love to do that from time to time, as long as it's wonderful. I mean, that's all that matters.
I'll send you some things. And actually, Kathy just recently, I think she's just finished it. Golda's working on it. She wrote a song cycle for the soprano Golda Schultz, who I think you also
Golda's coming. Wait a minute. Golda is coming to us on January the 24th, 2022. And she sent her program, and it's all female composers.
That's the one. Kathy's song cycle is on there.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to do that program too.
That's exciting. See, we're connected in so many ways, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Oh God, this has been wonderful, Kirsten. I could talk to you for hours and hours.
Oh, well, we can stay in touch anytime. It's lovely to be here. And when this is all over, I will come back to Vancouver too.
Yes, and you know what I'd like to do? I'd love to come with a group to your hall and let them have the experience, and then you can come and pull the ribbon when we open the Boulez Hall in Vancouver.
You're on.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much for your time, for your inspiration.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure. Take care. Do you think you're gonna open in the fall?
Well, we actually, at the moment, we have concerts planned at the end of February that haven't been cancelled yet.
Yes, okay.
We're living on a week-to-week basis at the moment,
yes.
But I think fall is realistic.
Okay, I hope it is here too. I hope to God, because it's enough already, isn't it?
For all of our souls,
Yes, take care.
You too.
And talk again.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Kirsten.